The helicopter cuts through the sky like a blade. The rotors roar over the calm ocean, reflecting the deep blue of the morning. Inside, 6 soldiers, and the weight of a silence that says more than any order. She senses it. Something's wrong. The sergeant in front stares at her with a half smile, the kind of provocation only those drunk with power dare to show. The others remain still, watching her, too cold, too quiet. Before she can react, firm hands grab her by the arms. Wind floods the cabin, a shove, and then the void. Her body plunges in freefall, swallowed by the sea. But what they didn't know is that she was born to survive in the water. And that morning, the ocean wouldn't be her grave. It would be the beginning of her revenge. The metallic echo carried through the narrow corridors of Ravenshield military base, boots striking in perfect rhythm, curt orders flying, the air thick with the scent of oil and burnt metal. Military life left no room for distraction. Every minute was timed, every gesture evaluated, and amid that human machinery, Corporal Eleanor Brooks, 29, moved in silence. She never drew attention. Walked straight, uniform spotless, eyes fixed ahead, reserved, disciplined, observant, loyal. The others said she was too by the book, a machine made of protocols. But none of them saw what lay beneath that control. A quiet restlessness, as if she were always waiting for something to go wrong. That morning, the central yard buzzed with the growl of engines being tested. The tactical division platoon was gearing up for the annual simulation cycle. Loud laughter, inside jokes, veterans telling stories that only they found funny. Eleanor sat at the edge of a metal bench, adjusting the optical scope of her rifle with a precision that felt personal. Sergeant Lewis Carter watched her from a distance, leaning against a crate, cigarette hanging from the corner of his mouth. He was the kind of leader who fed on control, and her calmness unsettled him. "Brooks, you polishing that barrel to see your reflection in it?" His voice cut through the yard's noise. Laughter followed. She looked up, replied firmly, height without arrogance. "If there's a mistake, sir, it won't be the rifles." The silence that followed was brief, but long enough to ignite something between them, a challenge disguised as respect. Hours later, during troop formation, Commander General Edward Prescott entered. Grave voice, hard eyes, no motivational speech, just a cold reading of new orders. Operation Sand Viper. Direct authorization from Central Command. 6 operatives. Rapid insertion, reconnaissance, and evacuation. Departure tomorrow's 0500 hours. The clipboard snapped as he began reading names. Sergeant Lewis Carter, Lieutenant Jason Mitchell, Second Lieutenant Ryan Hayes, Corporal Marcus Ellis, Corporal Tyler Donovan. One by one, the veterans were confirmed. Then came the surprise. Corporal Elena Brooks, assigned as tactical support. The murmur was barely audible, but she caught it. One corporal looked away. Another coughed to hide a smirk. Small gestures, disconnected at first glance, but together they formed a pattern. The kind of pattern she noticed, but never commented on. Later, back in the barracks, she was alone reviewing the supply list. Methodical, calculating. Every item noted, every tool separated. The distant sound of male laughter filtered through the thin walls, but she didn't care. Silence was where she thought best. Before turning off the lights, she faced her own reflection in the metal locker. There was no fear there. Only the strange feeling of being pushed into a game whose rules she didn't yet understand. The HH-60 helicopter glided over the sea, like a sharp blade slicing through the wind. Below, the ocean looked like a mirror, reflecting only the flashes of distant lightning. Inside the cabin, the sound of the rotors was the only constant noise, the kind that traps the air in your chest and turns time into something heavy. 6 soldiers, one silence, and a feeling that thickened with every breath, as if the air itself tasted like iron. Elena was seated near the side door, belt fastened, hands firm on the rifle's holster. The cold air hit her face, mixing with the smell of fuel and burnt metal. Sergeant Carter, sitting across from her, stared straight ahead with a neutral expression, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't speak, but his silence was louder than any order. "Distance to insertion point, 37 minutes, the pilot reported over the radio. Sergeant Carter answered with only a brief nod. Elena raised the tactical map. The coordinates blinked blue on the display, but something caught her attention. The flight path didn't match the route from the previous day's briefing. The helicopter had deviated more than 40 miles off its original course. heading toward the Koran archipelago, a territory that officially wasn't under military jurisdiction. She tried to stay focused. The protocol was simple: reconnaissance and evacuation. But the details didn't add up. Too much heavy equipment, too much ammunition, and the veterans too relaxed, as if they already knew there wouldn't be any simulation at all. Sergeant Carter broke the silence. "When we land, no one leaves the formation. This is neutral ground. Any step outside the perimeter, and you answer directly to command." The sentence was generic, but the tone, dry, almost threatening, carried a deeper intent. When they touched down, the atmosphere changed. The sea wind brought fine sand, the kind that clings to sweat and metal. The sun appeared and vanished behind clouds, revealing a scene that didn't look like a training field. Abandoned warehouses, rusted towers, and a row of containers with faded seals. While the rest of the group unloaded equipment, Eleanor did what she always did. She watched. Every movement, every exchange of glances. She saw two soldiers assembling a portable communications antenna, something not listed in the mission. She also saw boxes being opened, ammunition stamped with army seals, but without logistical records. And a few minutes later, a group of unknown men approaching in civilian clothes, military posture. Mercenaries. She said nothing, only took mental notes. 3 pickups, 8 civilians, an old flag painted grey on the vest of one of them. The kind of detail that reveals more than a whole report. The wind shifted. The smell of diesel and gunpowder grew stronger. One of the mercenaries extended a hand to Carter, handing over a metal briefcase. None of them looked surprised. No sudden movements. It was a transaction, and the army, or a part of it, was involved. Elena kept her gaze low, disguising her quickening pulse. She pretended to check her rifle, but her eyes followed the reflection of boots on the wet ground. She knew in that moment she was seeing something she shouldn't. When the briefcase was stowed and the helicopter refueled, Carter approached her. He stopped close enough for her to smell the strong cigarette and the grease from his vest. "You follow orders well, Brooks," he said, in a tone that sounded more like irony. "Yes, sir." "Keep it that way," he said. After that, nothing more was said. Just the sound of the rotors spinning again, the sky beginning to darken, and the Koran Sea starting to roar beneath them. On that return flight, something broke, an invisible line between trust and instinct. Eleanor didn't know it yet, but that mission wasn't about reconnaissance. It was about elimination. The helicopter lifted again, overloaded, and strangely so. Outside, the sky was still clear, but a grey shroud crept across the horizon. The forecast had already warned, a storm forming in the east. For now there was only wind. Cold, dry, the kind that signals something bad is coming. Elena sat near the side door, her gloves still damp with sweat and sand. She studied the illuminated panel in front of her. Altitude, route, speed, trying to find logic in numbers that didn't add up. The plan said return to base, but the heading pointed the opposite way. "The mission ends before the return," murmured Sergeant Lewis Carter, almost inaudible to pilot Lieutenant Jason Mitchell. Elena lifted her eyes, confused. The sergeant noticed her gaze and masked it with a short smile. "Routine check, Corporal. Nothing to worry about." She just nodded, but something in that phrase, "before the return," echoed in her mind like the sound of the rotors. The other soldiers were unnaturally calm. Corporal Tyler Donovan, surveillance and weapons specialist, stared out the window with a vacant expression. Corporal Marcus Ellis, logistics, fiddled with sealed boxes without looking at anyone. The co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Ryan Hayes, adjusted controls with robotic precision. The pilot, Lieutenant Jason Mitchell, kept the helicopter steady, avoiding eye contact. And Sergeant Carter watched the distant sea, jaw tight, expression cold. Outside, the winds picked up. The first thunder ripped through the distant sky, and the pilot spoke. "Storm coming from the east, sir. We can divert by 20 miles. "Negative," Carter replied. "We go straight." Tension thickened. Elena opened her field notebook and quickly wrote, "Incorrect route, 20 Sessington SW, unmarked boxes. Armed civilians present." When she lifted her eyes, she saw Carter's reflection in the glass. He was watching her with a look that wasn't of a superior nor of a colleague. It was the look of someone who had already made a decision. "Sir, we're off course," she said, keeping her tone professional. Carter turned slowly. "The helicopter is too heavy, Brooks. We need to adjust the load." His voice was cold, almost rehearsed. The pilot lowered the altitude. Corporals Donovan and Ellis switched positions. One locked the rear compartment. The other checked the side door latch. Elena felt her heart race. "What load, sir?" "The wrong one," Carter answered. She stood up, hand near her holster. "What's happening?" Carter stepped forward, his face now visible under the intermittent panel lights, and said, "Sometimes the Army makes mistakes, Brooks, and they need to be erased." Before she could react, Corporal Marcus Ellis grabbed her arm. Corporal Tyler Donovan seized her shoulder. The wind tore into the cabin, fierce, brutal. The roar swallowed her scream. "Sir, this is an illegal order." Carter just stared at her. "It's nothing personal." The shove came fast. Along with a clap of thunder, the world turned upside down. Sea and sky merged in a flash of blue. Elena plummeted. The wind sliced her face like blades. Her body spun, out of control. She fell from a height of just over 400 feet, about 120 meters. The sound of the rotors vanished, swallowed by the thunder. And then the impact. The sea swallows her. Everything is cold, dark, formless. The shock is brutal. Pressure invades her ears. Instinctively, she had held her breath before the fall. She feels her lungs burning. The weight of the vest and rifle drags her down, as if the ocean demanded her surrender. For a second, panic nearly wins. But a memory surfaces. "Don't fight the water, daughter. It's older than you," her mother's voice. Since she was 8, Eleanor trained in free diving during the early mornings in Corpus Christi. Her mother, a naval instructor, had said, "Those who fight the water die exhausted." Elena closes her eyes and applies the life-saving rules. First, don't struggle. Second, absorb the impact and free yourself from whatever pulls you down. She activates the quick release on her vest. The weight drops. Her body rotates diagonally. The perfect entry prevents fractures. She sinks about 10 meters, counts mentally. 1, 2, 3, 5 seconds. With the little air left, she applies her mother's taught protocol, a controlled ascent. Tilts her body at 45 degrees. Exhales slowly, controlling the pressure. No screaming, no panic. She does not fight the ocean. She uses it. At 13 seconds, she breaks the surface. The first breath comes mixed with salt and rain. Her chest burns, muscles tremble, but she is alive. The storm is now upon her. Lightning slices the sky. She adjusts, rifle secured with a side sling. The water temperature is low, 18 degrees, and her body has less than an hour before hypothermia sets in. In the distance, she sees the helicopter disappearing. But Elena does not scream. She simply survives. And the sea, which should have swallowed her, becomes her first ally. Elena turns onto her back and begins to float. Controlled breathing. Inhale for 2 seconds, exhale for 4. She uses her legs in a scissor kick, just enough to stay afloat. The rifle, secured by a side sling, tugs at her shoulder, but she adjusts it. Nothing is left behind. Far away, the helicopter vanishes into the clouds, taking with it the echo of the rotors and the weight of betrayal. But in the trembling reflection of the water, something shifts. Fear gives way to something quieter and far more dangerous. The will to return. Instinct tells her to swim, but she knows she mustn't. Another lesson from her mother. The sea always drifts something to you. Wait for it to show you what it wants to give. Minutes drag on. The rain thickens. The waves grow, and then, by a miracle, a metallic snap. She twists her body and sees, just a few meters away, a piece of fuselage floating, part of the helicopter that had partially exploded upon hitting the sea. Elena thanks God. With precise movements, she reaches the wreckage. She secures her left arm, adjusts her posture, and positions her body to minimize the drag of the waves. Now she has a point of support. A shelter. She scans the horizon, and nothing but darkness and distant lightning. But there is a strange calm, almost sacred. Every raindrop that hits her face is a reminder. She has passed the first test. As the helicopter drifts far away, descending until it vanishes, the sound of the rotors is replaced by the beat of her own heart. Elena Brooks does not scream. She simply survives, and the sea, which that night should have swallowed her, became her first ally. A silent battlefield, where a mother's legacy saved a soldier's life. The storm worsened at night, and the falling rain became a precious resource. Elena drank the rainwater, ensuring minimal hydration. During the day, the sun showed no mercy. The sea stretched endlessly like a blade. She sheltered among helicopter debris, metal panels, broken crates, pieces of rotor. Everything served as support and shade. The current slowly carried her over 40 kilometers to a chain of coastal rocks, a semi-sheltered zone between the islands of Koran. She was exhausted, with superficial injuries and bruises from the impact, but her determination had not faded. Her body trembled. Her mind did not. Her mother's training kept every decision calculated: alternate floating, conserve energy, avoid swallowing salt water. Meanwhile, the next morning, the military base launched a search operation. A helicopter scanned the supposed point of Elena's fall using thermal sensors and sonar. But the current had carried her too far. The final report read, "No sign of survivor. Adverse weather conditions. Elena survived 3 days adrift. On the second day, she used pieces of her uniform as an improvised filter to collect rainwater. On the third day, she spotted rocks on the horizon. Every stroke was a battle. When she finally touched solid ground, her knees gave way. But her soul remained standing. That night, a small merchant boat passed near the coast. The captain, a middle-aged man with the gaze of someone who had seen wars, spotted Elena's silhouette waving for help. The torn military uniform immediately drew attention, but the experienced captain recognized her as a survivor. The determined look, the injured body, the firm posture. He understood this was no lost civilian. Something military had happened. Without hesitation, he brought her aboard, offering first aid, potable water, food, and shelter. On board, Elena remained silent, absorbing information, assessing risks, but already with a plan in mind. For 2 days, Elena regained her strength. While eating small portions, drinking, and treating her wounds, she listened to the news on the civilian radio. The official report, signed by Sergeant Lewis Carter, declared, "Corporal Elena Brooks, killed in action, body not recovered. She was officially taken by enemy fire and lost at sea." The information, broadcast on a civilian station that had intercepted the military frequency, ignited her sense of justice. Those who had betrayed her believed she was dead. But Elena knew the sea, which should have swallowed her, had only tested her. She listened in silence. And for the first time since the fall, she smiled. Not a smile of relief, but of promise. The sea hadn't killed her. It had only returned her with a purpose. Amid the sound of the waves and the boat's engine, she drew her plan. It would not be impulsive revenge. It would be precise, strategic, it would be justice. The truth would come to light, and when it did, it would take them all down. When she stepped on solid ground 3 days later, her uniform was already tatters. Wounded but alive. But her eyes held the calm of someone who had conquered death. The sea, which should have been her grave, had become her accomplice. And as the rain ceased, a phrase echoed in her mind. "They thought I was dead, but the sea only returns those who have a reason to come back." For days, in the silence of her mind, Elena vowed that no one would erase her name. The civilians of a coastal village, a group of fishermen, fed her and hid her. When she recovered some strength, Elena began to reconstruct every second of the mission. The route, the deviations, Sergeant Carter's behavior, and something didn't make sense. The UH-60 Black Hawk they'd been in had a tracking system with a transponder and encrypted GPS linked to the base's central. The original route, from the base to the Sand Viper point, was direct without deviations. But Elena remembered clearly that after the first checkpoint, Carter had ordered a change of altitude and a course adjustment to avoid enemy detection. It was there. There they left the route and went to meet the mercenaries. Elena, who had been a communications technician before joining the Tactical Operations Corps, knew it wasn't possible to mask the flight path without tampering with the navigation system. And when a fragment of memory returned, the co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Ryan Hayes, fiddling with the side console panel, everything made sense. They had turned off the transponder for a few minutes, recording the previous coordinates to simulate a continuous transmission. Then they reprogrammed the synchronization module to restart with a position delay, creating the illusion of a linear flight. She now knew the official record would be false, and that no one would believe her, unless she returned with something stronger than words. Meanwhile, at the military base, the official report had already been delivered. During the return flight from Operation Sand Viper, we were ambushed by hostile fire from the coast. Corporal Eleanor Brooks was hit and fell into the sea. We attempted a rescue maneuver, but visibility conditions and enemy threat made recovery impossible. Presumed killed in action. The commander signed the document. Carter and his team were praised for their courage under enemy fire. There was even a ceremony. Folded flag, emotional speech, medals and tears. Eleanor's name echoed as that of a fallen heroine, while they, the killers, were the first to render salutes. A few days passed. The sea returned more than salt and memories. It returned purpose. Elena grew stronger. She returned in silence, under the guise of logistical support, as a civilian observer in the communications division. No one noticed. She had entered with temporary contractor authorization, haircut, face altered by days at sea, and civilian clothes. She acted as a technical observer, avoiding unnecessary contact, passing unnoticed by everyone, until the day of the internal flight security inspection, a meeting that would gather the entire command and the pilots responsible for Operation Sand Viper. The hall was full. Commander General Edward Prescott, in an impeccable uniform, opened the session. The sergeants were lined up, Sergeant Carter at the center, his gaze cold and confident. When the commander asked for the presentation of the route and transmission report, a female voice echoed from the back of the room. "Sir, if I may," said Elena, stepping inside. Silence fell like a gunshot. Carter's face turned pale. Some men instinctively stepped back. Others froze, unable to believe what they were seeing. "Corporal Brooks," the commander muttered, stunned. "But you—" "Udi," she finished, her tone cold. "That's what they wanted you to believe. If you'll allow me, Commander." She walked to the display panel and plugged in a flash drive. The projector flickered to life, revealing flight graphs, logs, and coordinates. "This is the GPS log from the UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter on the day of the mission. For 22 minutes, the transponder was manually shut down. There was no enemy interference. It was falsified." She changed the slide. "By cross-referencing the sync data with the base server, I identified a 48-mile jump-off course before Operation Sand Viper officially began. And during that gap, they threw me into the sea." Her voice hardened. "But before that, we landed in a strange location. Old warehouses, rusted towers, a line of cargo containers with erased seals. And there, Sergeant Carter conducted illicit negotiations of military resources with armed civilians, likely mercenaries." The commander rose, stiff and sharp, eyes locked on Carter. "Fais-le, Sergeant." "Explain yourself." Carter straightened his shoulders, trying to keep composure. "Sir, the system malfunctioned. We had to disable the transponder to prevent an overload." Eleanor cut him off, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "The overload was human, sir. They wanted to silence me. I was a threat, a witness. They tried to kill me to cover up the diversion of supplies and ammunition." Instinct tells her to swim, but she knows she mustn't. Another lesson from her mother. The sea always drifts something to you. Wait for it to show you what it wants to give. Minutes drag on. The rain thickens. The waves grow, and then, by a miracle, a metallic snap. She twists her body and sees, just a few meters away, a piece of fuselage floating, part of the helicopter that had partially exploded upon hitting the sea. Elena thanks God. With precise movements, she reaches the wreckage. She secures her left arm, adjusts her posture, and positions her body to minimize the drag of the waves. Now she has a point of support. Oh, shelter. She scans the horizon, and nothing but darkness and distant lightning. But there is a strange calm, almost sacred. Every raindrop that hits her face is a reminder. She has passed the first test. As the helicopter drifts far away, descending until it vanishes, the sound of the rotors is replaced by the beat of her own heart. Elena Brooks does not scream. She simply survives, and the sea, which that night should have swallowed her, became her first ally. A silent battlefield, where a mother's legacy saved a soldier's life. Courage is not in surviving the enemy, but in facing one's own lies. Corporal Brooks reminded us what it means to serve with honor. May her story never be forgotten, Elena saluted. Not for herself, but for all those silenced from within the system itself. Months later, the military court concluded the trial. Sergeant Lewis Carter was sentenced to 25 years in prison for treason, falsifying reports, attempted murder and mission diversion. Corporal Tyler Donovan and Corporal Marcus Ellis, 18 years each for complicity and executing the illegal order. Lieutenant Jason Mitchell, pilot, and Second Lieutenant Ryan Hayes, co-pilot, 10 years each, for omission and falsifying information in the official report. None of them would ever wear the uniform again. Elena's name was officially reinstated, and her mission recognized as an act of bravery and service. That night, upon learning the sentence of the traitors, Elena, alone at the base, watched the horizon. The wind carried the scent of the same sea that had nearly claimed her. She breathed deeply, free. Anne thought, "They thought I would die at sea, but the sea only returns those who have a reason to come back." And I came back. Thank you for watching this far. I'll see you in the next video, where every mission tells a story.